This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform where entrepreneurs can easily create and customize their own personal or professional website. More on Squarespace later in the video.
So hello and welcome to another episode of Biographics with me, your host Cal Smallwood, and today we're talking about Daisy and Violet Hilton, the Siamese Twins of Vaudeville. And the original article for this one was written by one Larry Holsworth. Beginning in the 1830s in Europe and the United States, travelling carnivals and circuses gained popularity. One feature of the travelling shows is a collection of acts and displays known as the sideshow, usually separate from the main acts of the show, hence the name, and thus requiring a separate admission fee. The sideshows display what many would politely call curiosities. Little people, then referred to as midgets, were quite popular, as were bearded ladies, overly obese people, heavily tattooed men and women, which would, I guess, I'm a heavily tattooed man entertaining you guys, so I guess that shows some things don't change, eh? Additionally, sideshows were also advertised wild men, which were just people born in exotic locales like Borneo, Tasmania, or somewhere else in the world that white people thought was interesting or unique. One of the most popular kind of attractions at these sideshows were conjoined twins, commonly known as Siamese Twins. They're linked to that part of Southeast Asia, which for the most part in the imagination of the presenters back then. They, together with their fellow performers, many of whom were fakes, form what became known as freak shows. When vaudeville and burlesque theatres gained popularity, the freak shows accompanied them. Conjoined twins, particularly those who exhibited other artistic talents, became large parts of vaudeville acts in the United States and Europe. Arguably one of the most famous of these acts in the early 20th century were the conjoined twins, Daisy and Violet Hilton. They performed in vaudeville, burlesque, carnival, circuses, and even a few films. Their acts included musical performances with Daisy on violin and her sister playing the saxophone and dancing. Eventually, both sisters played saxophones and clarinets as part of their act, which admittedly sounds kind of rad. Is that okay to say? It just sounds kind of cool to see like two people like just shredding on the saxophone while dancing. Like, I kind of want to see that. And despite their immense popularity, they were ruthlessly exploited and physically abused by their owners. It says that in the article. That's not great. Who denied them their own earnings, kept them under lock and key, and subjected them to physical and mental abuse. Theirs is a sad tale of exploitation and abuse, and unfortunately does not end in redemption. Most sources contend that one Dr. James Ruth, MRCS, assisted in the delivery of the Hilton sisters in Brighton, England on February 5th, 1908. However, in his written account published in the British Medical Journal a few years later in 1911, Dr. Ruth asserts that the delivery took place before his arrival and was assisted by a nurse and a midwife. According to the aforementioned Dr. Ruth, who reported on the birth of the girls and subsequent development, the twins were conjoined at the lower back and buttocks, though they shared a circulatory system and a single rectum. They were otherwise strong and healthy. He would say, and I quote, "They were fed from the beginnings on diluted cow's milk, as their mother declined to suckle them." Dr. Ruth also notes that their father was dead, though when and how the father died is not known to history. Their mother regarded the twins with revulsion, referring to them collectively as a monster. An unmarried barmaid described by Ruth as 21, tall and well built. The mother, called Kate Skinner, effectively wanted nothing to do with her children and allowed them to be bought by her employer, Mary Hilton. From the point of sale, the mother retained no further contact with the twins that we're aware of. And it's just weird that you could buy kids, but I guess it was a different child buying time back then. The girls were kept in rooms above the Queen's Arms, a Brighton pub where Mary found they could generate income by selling tickets to the pub's patrons to view them. She later moved them with her to the Evening Star, another Brighton pub jointly owned by Mary and her husband. Their guardians had the twins take both music and dancing lessons as they grew, which were paid for with the money they earned by just simply having people gawk at them in those pubs. Mrs. Hilton insisted that the girls refer to her as simply Aunt Mary, while her husband was to be addressed only as Sir. Perhaps she wanted to save the girls from confusion over her husband's name. Some sources claim she had as many as 5 husbands over the next several years, though whether she was legally married to them all or even any of them is disputed. When the girls failed to obey or were lax in their practice, Mary whipped them with the back end of the belt. 1911, when the twins were 3 years old, Mary Hilton took them on their first tour of Britain, advertising them as the United Twins. This tour was so successful that she followed up with tours of Germany and the European continent. The twins eventually appeared in burlesque shows and carnival sideshows, sang, danced and played their musical instruments. Mary then took the twins on a tour of Australia. In Australia, her own daughter Edith met a salesman and raconteur called Maya Myers, sometimes spelled Mayers, who married Edith and joined the travelling entourage. Doing what? I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah, it's probably fine. While Cal's making his way out of the dungeon, I'll take this opportunity to talk to you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Whether you are just starting out online or you're an established veteran taking the next step, Squarespace provides an easy and affordable solution to your web design woes. The first time that I tried to make a website for myself, there was a lot of complicated coding involved. Squarespace sidesteps this problem completely by offering you a ton of professional templates built for any situation. Just choose one you like, customize the content, and you are ready to go. He must be making his way through the arrow trap corridor. If you're the kind of person who would rather break the mold, you can use Squarespace's Fluid engine to go that one step further. If you want to add new elements to your pages, it's as easy as dragging and dropping. And then, if you want to customize those elements, that's only a few clicks away. I think he's found the lion pit. Once you've set your website up, you're probably going to want to know how many people are visiting it. Squarespace has a dedicated analytics page, which can tell you everything from where your viewers come from to which pages and keywords are the most popular. You can take this data and you can use it to improve your website, and you can also figure out the best way to market yourself and your business or products. Oh, that's the Raiders themed boulder run. I wouldn't want to be Carl right now. Head on over to squarespace.com/biographics, link in the description and pinned comment, and use the promo code Biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. I'm going to guess that by now he's found a way out. I probably shouldn't be here when he gets back.
In 1915, after the success in Europe and Down Under, Mary Hilton, the Myerses and the Hilton twins travelled to the United States where they sought entry at San Francisco. At first, they were denied, deemed medically unfit by immigration authorities. Meyer Myers, no stranger to the value of publicity, stirred up support among the city's newspapers. His ruse worked, and the twins were soon performing in the San Francisco stages. They embarked on a tour of the United States before eventually settling in San Antonio, Texas. Mary Hilton died in 1919 in Birmingham, Alabama. According to most sources, though, as with anything regarding the twins outside of their court documents, there are conflicting reports. Much of their backstory was invented by their promoters, as was commonly the case with many sideshow acts. At any rate, Hilton's will bequeathed her ownership of the twins to Edith and Meyer Myers. The girls were then 11 years old and unaware that bequeathing ownership of human beings was illegal in the United States. You got there in the end, guys. As their fame grew, so did their appearance fees that they were able to command, and according to some sources, they made upwards of $5,000 per week in the mid-1920s, roughly $86,000 a week in today's money. A 1924 article in the San Antonio Express described Violet and Daisy as strikingly beautiful, highly educated in book lore and history, and as refined as any other two young women in the universe. Yet despite their stardom and the fabulous sums of money they commanded, they remained under the complete control of the Myerses, with no money of their own and no say over what was in their act or when it would appear. While touring in carnivals, various acts which made up the playbills often held gatherings after the performances, in which the performers relaxed and entertained each other. Though Daisy and Violet were usually invited to such events, their managers refused to allow them to attend. Myers considered the carnival performers diseased and mentally deficient. He kept his charges isolated from their fellow performers to prevent them from being, and I quote, corrupted to such elements. Then, purely by chance, they encountered the world's most famous magician, who was working in Cleveland, Ohio. In the 1920s, Eric Weiss achieved worldwide fame as a magician under his stage name, Harry Houdini. Such was his renown that he's often marketed simply as Houdini, and he exploited his skills as an illusionist and escape artist by exhibiting seemingly impossible escapes while suspended from buildings or locked into trunks or other devices submerged in waters. No handcuffs could hold him, and for him, straitjackets were as simple to get out of as an ordinary shirt. Houdini accomplished his feats of magic and escape through extraordinary control of his muscles, his breathing, his internal organs, and most importantly, his mind. Throughout his life, he practiced mental exercises which helped him keep himself calm and focused on whatever task he faced, oblivious to distractions. His skill at mind and body control allowed him to hold his breath for seemingly impossible lengths of time. Examples of the things Houdini could do include wiggling out of a straitjacket while suspended by his ankles from a pole multiple stories in the air without regard to the danger. His presence of mind was, according to his own memoirs, the key to his success. Houdini had first encountered the Hilton sisters when they were being exhibited as curiosities in Glasgow, Scotland at the age of 3. During a vaudeville tour in 1925, Houdini appeared in Cleveland at the Palace Theatre. The twins, then on their first vaudeville tour, were appearing next door at the Cleveland's Lowe's Theatre. Remembering them from Glasgow, Houdini attended one of the performances, after which he called on the sisters backstage. He continued to visit them for the rest of their engagement. And whenever the two acts found themselves in the same city thereafter, he called on the twins despite the approval of Maya Myers. When Houdini met the Hilton sisters, he took immediate interest in their personal lives and well-being. He had the advantage of being the highest paid performer in the world at the time. No theatre owner at the time dared to antagonise the great Harry Houdini, which made him impervious to the remonstrations of the sisters' controllers. Houdini taught the sisters how to exist in their own separate world, rather than being constantly part of the world of their other twin. Daisy later wrote of Houdini, and I quote, "If we could have our choice of our fathers, we'd pick Harry Houdini. The magician taught them to separate themselves from each other mentally and spiritually, as well as emotionally." Both sisters later claim Houdini gave them the gift of a type of freedom from each other through the exercise of mental and emotional control. Later in the same vaudeville tour that saw the twins become enamoured with Harry Houdini, Daisy announced to a New York reporter that, and I quote, "We're both engaged, but we won't get married for 3 years at least." The twins were 17 years old at the time. To whom they were engaged was not specified, but it was likely nothing more than a teasing of the reporter. Both Edith and Maya Myers opposed any romantic relationships for their charges. If Daisy should give her hand to some worthy young man, a complication would arise that would be extremely embarrassing to her sister Violet. Edith was later quoted as saying, while on the road and at home in San Antonio, the twins were forced to sleep in the same room as Edith and Myers, under watch at all times. Their appeal to vaudeville audiences led to other up-and-coming acts to lobby to appear with them. One such act featured a pair of dancers and comedians, George Bynes and Leslie Towns Hopes, who called themselves the Dancer-Medians, which is a fantastic name. Why have I never heard of someone describing themselves as a dancer-median? That's so money. Hope described dancing with the twins as follows. At first, it was a funny sensation to dance with Siamese twins. They danced back to back, but they were wonderful girls. A few years later, Leslie Towns Hope changed his name, calling himself from then on simply Bob Hope. Wow, that's a pub quiz question I didn't know. The Bob Hope. Like, I was going to say small world, but I don't know Bob Hope, but it's just kind of strange to think like, legendary comedian Bob Hope was dancing with Siamese twins in a freak show. Just makes the world feel a little smaller, don't you think? They were looking for ideas for a mansion to be built using Daisy and Violet's earnings to serve as their residence in San Antonio. They finally found one in Springfield, Illinois, which had been designed by noted architect Frank Lloyd Wright. In the mansion they had built, they copied some of Wright's design, incorporated ideas of their own, and moved into the new house in 1927. Daisy and Violet's earnings paid for the house, although they were not consulted on its design. Daisy and Violet continued to accumulate large sums of money for their performances, making them vaudeville's highest earning performers in the late 1920s. Yet, they saw little to none of this money. The Myerses refused to even allow the girls to go on a shopping trip at home in San Antonio unless they were escorted by one of their guardians or a trusted underling. In 1927, Myers petitioned a San Antonio court to grant him full legal guardianship on the basis the girls suffered from an incurable physical disability. The petition was ultimately granted. In late 1927, Daisy found herself the object of desires of a fellow performer, a young singer named Don Galvin. Myers became aware of the attention as well and warned Galvin against pursuing it. At first the singer complied, but nonetheless made the mistake of leaving a vase with flowers outside the twins' dressing room door, accompanied with a note to Daisy. Myers found the vase first and read a note, and in a rage smashed it and the flowers. According to the girls' memoirs, when the girls discovered what Myers had done, they physically attacked him. The attack only ended when Edith pulled the girls off her husband's back, his shirt in tatters and his neck and face scratched and bleeding. Following the attack, the girls were granted a concession from Myers. Henceforth, they would receive a percentage of money they earned, in the form of weekly payments of $500 into a trust fund he established for them. Yes. He also agreed to let the girls travel without his immediate supervision, but with hired handlers to look after them. Freed of Myers' watchful eye, the sisters began to gain experience with members of the opposite sex, an experience which seldom ran smoothly, as you might expect. At one point in 1928, both girls were infatuated with the same man, Bill Oliver, who had been hired by Myers to look after them and maintain their welfare on the road. Oh man! Just never changed. Look at that. Hollywood stays the same. It's like just girls falling for the handlers. Like, you can make this into a movie. This should be a movie. Let's go. The sisters reportedly became so jealous of one another over Oliver that they wouldn't speak to each other for days, which must have been incredibly awkward given their circumstances. Each competed with the other for Oliver's attentions, buying him expensive clothing, jewelry, and even an REO Speedwagon automobile. In the end, the relationship led to serious trouble. Oh no, I don't like where this is going. Daisy and Violet continued to be leading performers on vaudeville stages in the late 1920s. They shared billing with the likes of Fanny Brice, Jack Benny, Eddie Cantor, Sophie Tucker, and other leading stars of the stage. Yet vaudeville itself was in decline. The pressure from a relatively new form of entertainment, motion pictures, grew. Many of the leading stars of the stage were lured to appear on the silver screen. Vaudeville audiences decreased in size as people would spend their dollars on the movies. Theatres which had formerly offered only live entertainment converted to movie houses and fewer stages beckoned to vaudeville stars. The twins also found direct competition in the form of another pair of conjoined twins, Margaret and Mary Gibb, who offered a similar act for considerably less money. Variety magazine reviewed the Gibbs twins act with a classical example of damning with faint praise, writing in part, "They're playing and dancing past as well as anyone would want, especially when not much is expected." With vaudeville declining even while competition increased, the Hilton sisters found their appeal to audiences dwindling. By 1930, the twins spent increasing amounts of their time idle at home in San Antonio, with few bookings, those they did have seldom sold out. Their earnings decreased noticeably. Then, in November 1930, the twins returned to the front page of newspapers and magazines, though not in reviews for their performances. As it turns out, Mr. Bill Oliver had been married, and Mrs. Oliver was none too pleased, and then named the twins in an alienation of affection suit. She demanded damages of $250,000. The lawsuit, which named both Daisy and Violet and accused them of using their wiles and deceits, led to lurid headlines, to say the least. The Kansas City Star described the case as a four-sided love triangle. Others were astounded that Oliver could make love to one sister while maintaining good relations with the other. One columnist lauded Oliver's clear gifts for diplomacy. Myers would later acknowledge that the accusations in the suit were likely true, yet he still considered it little more than a shakedown. The scandal lived in the press for much of the 1930s, and the public perception of the Hilton sisters changed. They became less favourable in the eyes of the public, and the sympathy they had once engendered was replaced with moral condemnation. But as the fickle public is wont to do, opinion changed once again. This time the moral outrage being directed towards Myers and his wife Edith. The lawyers hired to defend them in the lawsuit learned of the vast sums the twins had earned and the manner in which the Myerses had controlled them. The sex scandal was supplanted by an arguably juicier one, featuring theft, abuse, and exploitation of the disabled. In 1931, with the support and urging of Harry Houdini, the sisters sued their managers and legal guardians. Myers responded to the suit with pious bluster, saying, and I quote, "My wife and I have tried for 14 years to take the girls all places possible, constantly taking them to theatres, dancers, and other places." He claimed, and again I quote, "But they can't fit in with that kind of life, and they should realise it. Edith was equally oily," stating, in part again, "They don't seem to be making any allowances for the time I have spent with them, constantly caring for them and attending to their wants." She would later tell the San Antonio Light, "I have spent the best part of my life in their interests, and now they ignore me." She later added, "Why, they didn't even send me a Christmas card." Yeah, 'cause you suck. The trial held in San Antonio revealed the extent of the wealth accumulated by Myers and Edith Myers at the expense of the twins. The Myerses held stocks, bonds, and an extensive portfolio of Texas real estate purchased with the money earned by Daisy and Violet, none of which was in their names. A sensation in the local newspapers, the trial included testimony by Myers that he had never struck the twins in any manner. Testimony refuted by the sisters on the witness stand. Violet testified that the twins had been treated as prisoners to the point they were not even allowed to attend church. She would say, "We were taught to do our praying at home." Now, you know what? If you want to get the sympathy of a jury in Texas, that's the way to do it. Well played, Violet, well played. The lawsuit was settled in the sisters' favour. The earlier sex scandal suit was settled as well. The sisters emerged from the courts in 1931, fully emancipated, in control of their own earnings, and with $100,000 in damages to boot, about $2 million in today's money, assessed against Myers and Edith Myers. The real property they had paid for remained in the hands of Myers and Edith. The twins celebrate a return to vaudeville as the Hilton sisters review. By the time Violet and Daisy returned performing in 1931, vaudeville was all but dead. They found their audiences in the burlesque theatres and concert halls, and their earnings were substantially curtailed from those of their heyday. That summer they went to Hollywood, where they appeared in the pre-code title Freaks, which anyone who studied film has no doubt watched, because it's one of those just like incredibly fascinating and compelling stories of its creation and response to, and the subsequent censorship and response from the media and audiences and movie industry itself. It's a really fascinating story that I'm not doing justice because I studied it 15 years ago when I did my own studies. If you can look it up, I would highly recommend doing so. It's a fascinating tale. Among the unfortunates recruited for the film were a woman known as Lady Olga, the bearded lady, a man born with neither arms nor legs called Prince Randian and known as the Human Caterpillar, and a young man with no body below the ribcage called the Half Boy. The twins largely ignored their fellow performers during filming. Willard Sheldon, a scriptwriter on the project, said of the twins in a horrid pun, if that's what it was intended to be, They stuck pretty much to themselves. After filming Freaks, the sisters returned to performing in burlesque houses and theatres with steadily dwindling success. In 1936, Daisy became pregnant. She eventually gave the child up for adoption. While Daisy was pregnant, Violet married an actor, James Moore. Violet's marriage lasted 10 years, though it was largely done for publicity, and rumours persisted that her husband was gay. They lived separately and eventually divorced. Daisy married in 1941. That marriage to actor-dancer Harold Estep lasted all of 10 days. So I guess one sister always had a one-up on the other one, because that's the thing, like, sibling rivalry is just a thing. This sounds like the most intense sibling rivalry ever. Like, they were literally trying to, like, bang the same dude. Daisy and Violet remained in the public eye, largely due to gossip over their relationships and sexual activities. Daisy told one reporter that whenever her sister was entertaining, she would simply read a book or turned away to go to sleep. I can't imagine the levels of ego bruising that would happen for a dude if you, like, try to give it your best moves. You sat there, you're giving it riz, and you just see the person literally joined at the hip with your new beau, just like reading a book and be like, are you done? That's gotta suck. The sisters appeared in another film in 1952, Chained for Life. Loosely based on their own lives, the film was poorly received, though the twins made live appearances at its showings, where it was frequently paired with Freaks in a double bill. The failure of their films to draw audiences meant their live performances were frequently unobserved by paying customers. In the early 1950s, the sisters tried retirement from performing, opening, of all things, a small hot dog stand in Miami, Florida. It too failed. By the mid-1950s, the sisters were back on the road, this time performing a striptease act in seedy theatres and burlesque houses. According to Violet, and I quote, "We made the big switch to this sort of dancing for two reasons: money and fun. Mostly fun." By then, the twins were nearly destitute, their previously earned fortune gone. In December 1961, the sisters made their last public appearance as performers at a drive-in theatre in Monroe, North Carolina. As they did so, their booking agent absconded with their earnings, because of course, like one last kick in the ass before, retiring forever. They were stranded, nearly penniless, without the funds to return to their rented apartment in Miami. The owner of the motel they were staying in took pity on the sisters, offered them free rooms and dining privileges at a nearby restaurant that he owned, and found them work at a local grocery store. He also found them a more permanent residence in a mobile home in a trailer park outside of Monroe. The twins worked as cashiers in a park and shop grocery in a specially designed and built booth, which accommodated them both, allowing each to service one lane of shoppers, which admittedly is really good of the owner. So I'm British, and folks at home, if you're listening to this and it's not cut out, is it true that American cashiers just can't sit down? This is a thing that we always get over here. Cashiers get reamed out for sitting down on the job because it's lazy, even though their job doesn't require them to stand up. I'm sat down right now. If I did this job stood up, I'd hate it. So is that a thing? And then you just look back, nearly 50 years ago, they made special accommodations that allowed, Violet and Daisy to, work with some dignity and, self-reliance. Understandably, walking to work each day drew the attention of locals, some of it unwelcome, but for the most part, the town supported the twins and their customers. Their income was sufficient to allow them to rent a small home. Their last years thus passed in relative obscurity, far from the limelight when they spent most of their lives. In December 1968, the twins were stricken with influenza during the season's outbreak of Hong Kong flu. On January 4th, 1969, after the twins had not been seen for several days, the police conducted a welfare check. The sisters were dead, Daisy having succumbed first, Violet following 2 to 4 days later. They were 61 years of age. Their funeral was sparsely attended, with most of the mourners and all the pallbearers their fellow employees from the park and shop. The twins, who had once commanded as much as $6,000 per week in salary, left behind an estate with just about $1,600 after expenses. Their home, built by their earnings in San Antonio, still stands to this day. And although the sisters are still celebrated there, they long faded into obscurity everywhere else. And cheers for tuning into this episode of Biographics. It had a bittersweet ending, but not as bad as I was expecting from that intro. Again, the article that formed the base of this video was written by Larry Holsworth. Find links to their socials below, no doubt. I am your host, Carl Smallwood. Thank you very much for tuning in. Links to my stuff will be found below. I run a channel called Fact Fiend, as well as being the interim host for the other sister projects to Biographics, Geographics, and Top Tens. Much appreciate everyone tuning in, and as always, have the day you deserve. Cheers.